Ain't no pressure besides brilliance. Trev's Hockey Show. I'm the Trev. That's too sweet. Anyway, continuing with retired numbers, and well, I can't put this one off any longer. I mean, unless I really have no desire to talk about the Detroit Red Wings and their retired numbers, but there's some pretty damn good names associated with the retired numbers in Detroit that I can't put this one off. I have to do this one, regardless of how long it's going to take. It almost took me a month to write this. But to be fair, March was a busy month for this guy. But either way, we're talking about the second number retired by the Detroit Red Wings. And, well, the first number we covered here is its own topic of debate. And, well, all I'm going to say from here is this is the second number retired by the Detroit Red Wings. That one was retired at one point. So, moving on. Before I get started, what can I say that hasn't already been said when it comes to today's topic? I mean, before Gretzky, before Lemieux, before Bossy, there was this guy. And this guy was the early measuring stick of what great and hockey player in the same sentence looked like. I mean, he did it all when it came to offense and everything that came generated from it. So, sit down, grab a snack, grab a pop. This could be a long video. Either way, we're talking about the number 9, which was worn in Hockeytown by Mr. Hockey, none other than Gordie Howe. So let's talk about it. Alright, so Mr. Hockey's 25 seasons with the Detroit Red Wings began on October 8th, 1946, when he was signed as a free agent from the Omaha Knights of the United States Hockey League. Now, the story of Gordie Howe can go as far back as 1943, when the New York Rangers held a training camp in Winnipeg, and he had tried out for that and was offered a C form. Now, a C form was essentially it was a form given to a player by a club that wanted to retain their rights as a National Hockey League player. Thankfully, cooler heads prevailed because Howe didn't see himself as a long-term fit with the New York Rangers. But he did go to the Detroit Red Wings junior camp in Windsor, Ontario, where he was again offered a C form and signed that and was assigned to their junior team. But due to the number of maximum Western players allowed to play at the time, he didn't get a lot of playing time until he was promoted to Omaha in 1945. And thanks to the help of one Frank Selke of the Toronto Maple Leafs, all the clinical errors on making sure Detroit had Howe's rights were in place so that he could make his debut for the 46-47 season. Now, at this point, Red Wings fans were not at all unfamiliar with the name Howe, as former Red Wing Sid Howe, no relation, had retired after the 1945-46 season. So one could say one Howe leaves, another one comes in. Now, he would make his debut on October 16th, 1946 against the Toronto Maple Leafs and score his first goal in said game, and would add his first assist 3 days later. Now, all told, Howe would finish his first season in the AHL with 22 points in 58 games to help the Red Wings advance to the playoffs. Now, in said playoffs, the Red Wings would lose to the semifinals against the eventual Stanley Cup champs, the Toronto Maple Leafs, in 5 games, with Howe failing to record a point. Now, other than that playoff run, not at all that first year. The 1947-48 season would see Howe switch to the more familiar number 9, and would also see Howe placed on a line with Sid Abel and Ted Lindsay, both future video topics here, to form what was known as the production line. Now, Howe would also play in his first of 22 NHL All-Star games as a member of the Detroit Red Wings, which is part of a league record. Now, this is a part 1. Part 2 will tie it all up. Now, Howe would finish the season tied for third in team scoring with 44 points in 60 games played, and Detroit would advance to the playoffs, meeting the New York Rangers in a very close 6-game semifinals to eliminate them and advance to the Stanley Cup Finals for the first time since 1945. Now, unfortunately, The Red Wings would get the defending Stanley Cup champions and the Toronto Maple Leafs, who were in the midst of becoming their own little dynasty, and showed the Detroit Red Wings why, outscoring them 18-7 in 4 games. Now, Howe would only put up 2 points in 10 playoff games. Not a bad second season. The 1948-49 season would see Howe limited to only playing 40 games, recording 37 points in the process, which was still good for third in team scoring, and the Detroit Red Wings would finish first in the NHL by 9 points, easily qualifying for the playoffs, but having to make a run of it. Now, in the semifinals, the Red Wings will go a full 7 games against the Montreal Canadiens, including a 3-overtime Game 1, which was also a difference of goals. The Red Wings would advance to the Stanley Cup Finals for the second straight year, and for the second straight year would meet the now defending 2-time Stanley Cup champs in the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, the biggest difference between this year's Stanley Cup Finals compared to the season prior is it wasn't a total goal blowout like it was the year prior, but the common theme that these two have in common is that both ended with Detroit losing the Stanley Cup in 4 games. Now, Howe would lead the team in playoff scoring, going a point per game in 11 games. Now, a much better improvement from 2 points the year prior. Now, but for his season, though, Howe would be nominated to the NHL's second All-Star team. The 1949-50 season would see Howe and the Red Wings take a step forward in the conversation of great. Now, firstly, the Red Wings would finish first in league standings by 11 points. And this year would see Howe record his first of 19 regular season hat tricks with the Detroit Red Wings, doing so on February 11th, 1950 against the Boston Bruins, then scoring his second over a month later on March 19th against the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, all told, Howe would finish with 68 points in 70 games. Now, that was not only good enough for third amongst the team in points, but also be good enough for third in league scoring. So he's getting pretty damn close to finishing first. In a rare instance that hadn't happened before, though, and hasn't happened since, the production line had led the league in scoring, with Ted Lindsay finishing first and Sid Abel finishing second. So the production line went 1, 2, 3. But for all the good comes the bad, and as in the first game of the playoffs, Howe's greatness would almost come to a complete halt thanks to a bad hit from Ted Kennedy that would eventually send Howe to the hospital with a fractured skull, amongst other injuries, and had to require emergency surgery to release some of the pressure off of his brain. Yikes. Now, although Howe would only play that one game, the Red Wings would do him a solid and eliminate the Toronto Maple Leafs in a hard-fought 7-game series to advance the Stanley Cup Finals for the 4th straight year, going a full 7 games against the New York Rangers and winning the Stanley Cup in a double overtime Game 7. Yeah, it was that good. To give the Red Wings the team's 4th Stanley Cup in franchise history and their first since 1943, but more importantly, the first Stanley Cup for Gordie Howe in his career. And he only played 1 game for it. Now, for the season Howe had, he would be nominated to the NHL's second All-Star team. Now, for the 1950-51 season, the biggest question was how would Gordie respond after having an injury much like he did in that year's playoffs? And really, well, this is where we start getting good. Now, firstly, the Red Wings would top the league in points for a 3rd straight year, becoming the first team in NHL history to finish with 100 points or more in a season. And as for Howe, well, I mean, he only led the league in goals with 43, along with the league leading 43 assists to lead the league in points with 86 in 70 games played. Now, he would also score 3 hat tricks this season, all against the Chicago Blackhawks, and 2 within 6 days of each other. The first being on January 17th, 1951, and the second being on January 23rd. So, looking to capitalize on their regular season success and defend their Stanley Cup, the Red Wings would meet the Montreal Canadiens. And despite being the heavy favorites, the Red Wings couldn't muster up enough after the first 2 games, which both included 7 overtime periods between them. a lot of hockey in the first 2 games, and would be eliminated by the eventual Stanley Cup finalists in 6 games, with Howe putting up 7 points in those 6 games. But for the season that Howe had, Howe would be awarded his first Art Ross Trophy for leading the league in scoring, as well as earn his first nomination to the NHL's first All-Star team. The only thing missing was the Cup. 1951-52 would almost be more the same for both Howe and the Red Wings, as the Wings would finish first for the 4th straight year, finishing 22 points ahead of the Montreal Canadiens. Howe would again lead the league in goals with 47 and tie for a team lead in assists with 39, and would again lead the league in points with 86 in 70 games played. It would be this season where he would also record his first of 2 New Year's Eve hat tricks, doing so against the Montreal Canadiens. Now, the production line would again dominate the league in scoring, with Lindsay finishing 2nd and Abel finishing 8th. Now, in the playoffs, the Red Wings showed sheer dominance the entire way, managing to sweep the Toronto Maple Leafs in 4, outscoring them 13-3 to advance the Stanley Cup Finals for the 5th time in 7 years. Now, interestingly enough, your random tidbit of info here, it was the first time in league history the defending Stanley Cup champions were swept. How about that, right? There, they would meet the Montreal Canadiens, who just came out of a 7-game series against the Boston Bruins, and much like against the Maple Leafs, the Red Wings would sweep the Canadiens in 4, while outscoring them 11-2 to win the team's 5th Stanley Cup, but more importantly, their 2nd in 3 years, with Howe leading the league in playoff points with 7 points in 8 games. The Cup Finals saw the Red Wings become the first team in 17 years since the 1935 Montreal Maroons to go undefeated in the playoffs. So when you're great and you know it, you got to show it. And that year's playoffs was no joke. Now, for the season Howe had, he'd be awarded his 2nd Art Ross Trophy for leading the league in scoring and becoming the first player to win it twice, as well as being awarded his first Hart Memorial Trophy, which was awarded to league MVP, and he would also be nominated to the NHL's first All-Star team for the 2nd time in his career. Now that is a great season. The 1952-53 season would see the end of the original production line, with Sid Abel making his way to Chicago, but it would see the 2nd version of the production line, now with future video topic Alex Del Vecchio, taking Abel's place, but other than that, not much had changed. Now, Howe would score his first penalty shot goal on March 5th, 1953. And all told, the Red Wings would finish first in the league for a 5th straight year, finishing 15 points ahead of the Montreal Canadiens, with Howe again leading the league in goals with a career-best 49, along with a league-leading 46 assists to go with his league-leading 95 points. Now, those 95 points would also make him the first player in league history to record 90-plus points. Now, in the playoffs, the heavily favored Detroit Red Wings met the Boston Bruins, and despite jumping out early with a dominant Game 1 win, the Bruins managed to figure out the defending Stanley Cup champs, eliminating them in 6 games, with Howe adding 7 points in those 6 games. Now, despite the less than desired results, Howe would be awarded his 3rd straight Art Ross Trophy, his 2nd straight Hart Memorial Trophy, and would be nominated to the NHL's first All-Star team for the 3rd time in his career. Now, 1953-54 would be yet another successful year for Howe and the Red Wings, and the team would lead the NHL in points for a 6th straight year, and Howe would again lead the league in assists with 48, as well as in points with 81. It would also be the first time in his career he would record over 100 penalty minutes. So, might as well add that too, right? Finishing with a career high 109. Now, in the playoffs, the Red Wings were obviously favorites to win the Stanley Cup, and we're off to a hot start and managing to eliminate the Toronto Maple Leafs in 5 games to get back to the Stanley Cup Finals after 1 year away to play the defending Stanley Cup champs in the Montreal Canadiens for a rematch of the 1952 Stanley Cup Finals. Now, however, this one didn't come so easily. Despite having a 3-1 lead in the series, the Montreal Canadiens didn't go quietly. taking the series to a full 7 games, including a Game 7 overtime, where Detroit managed to end it early, winning the team's 3rd Stanley Cup in 5 years, with Howe adding 9 points in 12 games. And with the season Howe had, he'd be awarded his 4th straight Art Ross Trophy and would be nominated to his 4th first NHL All-Star team. So, not just good, doing great. Now, the 1954-55 season would be the Red Wings' 7th straight season leading the league in points, but this time they only led by 2. And while Howe would lead the team in goals with 29, he would only finish 5th in league scoring with 62 points in 64 games. Only 5th. Now, those 2 points, they were being trailed by the Montreal Canadiens all season long. They were hot on their tails. So if Detroit was winning, so was Montreal. So that's how close it was for the 54-55 season between those two anyway. In the playoffs, the Red Wings had only defending the Stanley Cup on their mind and made getting there look pretty easily, sweeping the Toronto Maple Leafs in nearly double the goals, 14-6 to be exact, to get back to the Stanley Cup Finals, where, as they would have it, they would once again meet the Montreal Canadiens for the 3rd time in 4 years for the Stanley Cup. Now, it's only worth pointing out, the Canadiens were without Maurice Richard this year, as this was the year he was serving his suspension that came as a result of the Richard riot, which, I know I've said this before, I do intend to talk about it at some point. But even without Richard, the Canadiens didn't make anything easy for Detroit. Imagine take this series to a full 7 games, which also saw Howe record his only playoff hat trick in a Game 5 win. And in a weird series where the home team won every game, the Red Wings would continue that trend, winning Game 7 on home ice to win their 4th Stanley Cup in 6 years, the 7th in team history, with Howe setting career highs all across the board in terms of playoff points, with 9 goals, 11 assists, and 20 points in 11 games played. Well over a point per game average at this point. So with that 4th cup in 6 years, the Red Wings would be recognized by the NHL as a dynasty team, but early spoiler, this would be their last Stanley Cup for a while. The 1955-56 season would prove to be a bit of a change of a pace compared to the last 7 seasons, as they finished 2nd in the league by 24 points. So they finished 2nd and weren't anywhere near 1st. Now, Howe would lead the team in goals, assists, and points with 79 in 70 games played, which is good enough for 2nd in league scoring. So not quite 1st. Close, but not quite. Now in the playoffs, with a 3-peat in mind, the Red Wings made short work of the Toronto Maple Leafs in 5 games to once again advance to the Stanley Cup Finals for a 3rd straight year. And once again, a date with the Montreal Canadiens. I guess if you want to put an exact number on that, that's the 4th time in 5 years. But unlike the previous 2 Stanley Cup Finals, though, this one was not in question, as the Montreal Canadiens, with Maurice Richard in the lineup this time, started their own dynasty, winning the Stanley Cup in 5 games, with Howe adding 12 points in 10 games. It wouldn't be all bad a season, though, as Howe would be nominated to the NHL's 2nd All-Star team for the 3rd time in his career. 1956-57 would see the Red Wings return to being a dominant team, finishing 1st in the league in points after a year away from the top spot. Now, Howe would lead the league in goals with 44 and would lead the league in points with 89 in 70 games, finishing 4 points ahead of line mate Ted Lindsay. Little tidbit for you for this season: Howe would score a Christmas hat trick. One of those rarities where the NHL actually played games on Christmas, which I will talk about at some point, and he scored a hat trick on that game versus the New York Rangers. Now in the playoffs, the Red Wings would look to carry that same success to another trip to the Stanley Cup Finals, but would be denied in 5 games to the eventual Stanley Cup finalists in the Boston Bruins, with Howe adding 7 points in those 5 games. Now, for his regular season, Howe would be awarded his 5th Art Ross Trophy, his 3rd Hart Memorial Trophy, and would be nominated to the NHL's 1st All-Star team for the 5th time in his career. Now, 57-58 would be a season of big change for the Detroit Red Wings, as the team had traded Ted Lindsay to the Chicago Blackhawks prior to the start of the season, effectively breaking up the second version of the production line. And with such a move, the letters on the jerseys moved as well, and while Red Kelly was the team captain at that point, Howe was given the alternate A. Now the Red Wings seemed to fall down a few rungs, as instead of the usual first in the league finish, the Red Wings fell into third in the league. I know. Should have been first, right? But, change will do that. With Howe leading the team in all offensive categories with 77 points in 64 games, which was good enough for fourth in league scoring. Now, the Red Wings would manage to advance to the playoffs, but fell out in a 4-game sweep to, at that time, the 2-time and eventual 3-time Stanley Cup champs in the Montreal Canadiens. Yeah, with Howe putting up 2 points in those 4 games. So that was a constant in the 50s. You were either going to win the Stanley Cup or you're going to lose to the Montreal Canadiens. One of the two. But for his regular season, though, Howe would be awarded his 4th Hart Memorial Trophy and be nominated to NHL's first NHL All-Star team for the 6th time in his career. Now, 58-59 would be yet another season of change, with Howe being named the team's 15th captain in team history, a letter he would wear for 4 years. Now, unfortunately, that would really be the only positive for the Detroit Red Wings, as for the first time in Gordie Howe's career anyway, the Red Wings failed to qualify for the playoffs, finishing last in the NHL. Now, for the Red Wings, this marked the first time in 20 years they hadn't played in the playoffs. Howe, though, would again lead the team in all offensive categories, leading them with 78 points, which is again good enough for 4th in league scoring. Now, for his regular season, Howe would be nominated to the NHL's 2nd NHL All-Star team for the 4th time in his career. 1959-60 would be a nice rebound season for the Detroit Red Wings, as they actually made their way back to the playoffs, finishing 4th in the league. And Howe would lead, again, the team in all offensive categories with 73 points in 70 games, which is good enough for 6th in league scoring. Now, the playoff run, though, well, it would only last 6 games, losing to the eventual Stanley Cup finalists in the Toronto Maple Leafs, with Howe putting up 6 points. But for his regular season, Howe would be awarded his 5th Hart Memorial Trophy, as well as a nomination to NHL's first NHL All-Star team for the 7th time. 1960-61. We're finally entering the 60s. It would almost be a repeat of the season prior, in the sense that the Red Wings would again finish 4th in the league. However, Howe would set the bar for players in terms of career points, becoming the first player to record 1,000 career points with a pair of assists against the Toronto Maple Leafs on November 27, 1960. Now it would take another player over 7 years to hit that mark. And what's equally impressive for this time anyways is Howe did 1,000 points in 938 games. So 1,000 in less than 1,000. Pretty damn good. All told, Howe would lead the team in assists and points with 72, which is also good for 5th in league scoring. And in the playoffs, the Red Wings would see their best playoff run since 1956, as the Red Wings managed to eliminate the Toronto Maple Leafs in 5 games for their first trip to the Stanley Cup Finals in 5 years. Unfortunately for Detroit, though, the opponent was the Chicago Blackhawks, who packed a massive 1-2 punch in Stan Mikita and Bobby Hull. And it showed, as the Red Wings would lose the Cup in 6 games, with Howe adding 15 points in 11 games, which included matching his career high with 11 assists. Now, those 15 points also led the league in playoff scoring. Yeah, just a nice, runner-up prize compared to not having a cup. But for the season Howe had, he would be nominated to the NHL's 2nd NHL All-Star team for the 5th time. 1961-62 would unfortunately be another year of digression, as the Red Wings had missed the playoffs by 4 points. But we managed to hit a few milestones and neat notes along the way. Now, Howe would play in game number 1,000 on November 26, 1961. He'd score his 2nd career New Year's Eve hat trick, 10 years apart from his first, with 1 goal coming off his 2nd penalty shot, as well as becoming the 2nd player in league history to score 500 goals, doing so on March 14, 1962 against Gump Worsley and the New York Rangers. All told, Howe would again lead the Red Wings in all offensive categories with 77 points, which is good enough for 3rd in league scoring. Now, for his season, Howe would be nominated to NHL's 2nd NHL All-Star team for the 6th time in his career. 1962-63 would be a competitive year, not just for the Red Wings, but for the top four teams in the NHL at this point, as the top four spots were only separated by 5 points, with the Red Wings finishing fourth. Now, Howe would lead the league in goals and points with 86 in 70 games. Now, in the playoffs, the Red Wings, who weren't favorites going in, managed to eliminate the Chicago Blackhawks in 6 to advance to the Stanley Cup Finals for the second time in 3 years. Unfortunately for the Red Wings, though, they would be facing the defending Stanley Cup champs in the Toronto Maple Leafs for a rematch of the 1949 Stanley Cup Finals. And really, the only difference between 49 and 63 was one game, where the Red Wings were swept in 4 in 1949. The Red Wings would lose the Stanley Cup in 5 games in 1963, with Howe adding 16 points in 11 games. But for the season Howe had, he awarded his 6th Art Ross Trophy, his 6th Hart Memorial Trophy, and his 8th NHL First Team All-Star nomination. So coming into the 1963-64 season, Howe is sitting second all-time in goals in a career, coming into the season at 540, which was only 5 away from owning the record set by Maurice Richard. And he would tie the record at 544 on October 27, 1963, after going goalless for the next 5 games, and would score for number 545 on November 10th on home ice to become the NHL's all-time goal leader, further cementing his status as one of the best players of all time. Now, the Red Wings would again finish 4th in the NHL, with Howe leading the team in all offensive categories, while finishing 5th in league scoring with 73 points in 69 games. Nice. The playoffs were pretty much a repeat of the season before, with the Red Wings eliminating the Blackhawks in 7 games to advance to the Stanley Cup Finals for the 2nd straight year, the 3rd time in 4 years. And, well, much like the previous season, the Red Wings would meet the 2-time defending Stanley Cup champs in the Toronto Maple Leafs. And despite being a very close series, going all the way to a Game 7, after Detroit took a Game 6 overtime win, the Maple Leafs kept the door shut in Game 7, with the Red Wings losing the Stanley Cup to the now 3-time in a row Stanley Cup champs for the 2nd straight year, with Howe adding 19 points in 14 games, matching his career playoff high in goals with 9. But for his regular season, Howe would be nominated to the NHL's 2nd NHL All-Star team for the 7th time. 1964-65 would see the Red Wings return to their winning ways, at least the way they were used to finishing first in the league, for the first time since 1956-57. Now, Howe would finish the season with a team leading 47 assists to go with his 76 points in 70 games, which is good enough for 3rd in league scoring. Now, the playoffs, though, well, it wasn't a repeat of the last 2 years, as they would be eliminated by the eventual Stanley Cup Finalists in the Chicago Blackhawks in 7 games, with Howe adding 6 points in those 7 games played. But for the season he had, Howe would be nominated to the NHL's 2nd NHL All-Star team for the 8th time in his career. I hope you're still with me. We're almost done. The 1965-66 season would see Howe play in his 17th NHL All-Star game, but this year he'd be named the All-Star Game MVP after a 4-point game. And he'd also be the first player to score 600 goals in his career, doing so on November 27th, 1965. Now, as for the Red Wings, well, they would just make the playoffs, finishing 4th in the league, with Howe leading the team in assists and points with 75 in 70 games, and his 75 points were good enough for 5th in league scoring. Now, in the playoffs, we get the same semifinals match as last season, only this time the Red Wings would eliminate the Chicago Blackhawks in 6 games to advance to the Stanley Cup Finals for the 4th time in 6 years. And this year would be a rematch of the 1958 Stanley Cup Finals, where they play the Montreal Canadiens, who were, again, the defending Stanley Cup champs. The only real difference between this year's finals and the 1958 Stanley Cup Finals was this one went to 6 games. But much like the 1958 Stanley Cup Finals, the Red Wings would lose the Stanley Cup to the Canadiens, with Howe adding 10 points in 12 games. Unfortunately, this would be the last time Howe would play in the Stanley Cup Finals, and would be the last Stanley Cup Finals series for the Red Wings for 29 years. But for the regular season he had, Howe would be nominated to the NHL's first NHL All-Star team for the 9th time in his career. 1966-67 would see the start of the decline for the Detroit Red Wings, as in the last season before expansion, the Red Wings would finish 5th in the league, missing the playoffs for the first time in 4 years. And in a weird sense of that hardly happens, Howe finished 2nd in team scoring with 65 points in 69 games. But that still had Howe tied for 4th in league scoring, which is still not a bad thing. Now, for his season, Howe was nominated to the NHL's 2nd NHL All-Star team for the 9th time in his career. So the 1967-68 season would see the NHL expand from 6 teams to 12, which would also mean the NHL had division alignments, which put the Red Wings in the newly made East Division, which consisted of all the other 5 NHL original 6 teams. So it really wasn't much to change anything, other than there were 6 other teams in the West Division. So now, more teams usually meant more scoring opportunities, and even at 40 years old during this season, Howe could still put up great numbers, leading the team in goals and points with 82 points in 74 games, which was also good enough for 3rd in league scoring. Now, the Red Wings, however, while being in a division like the East, it didn't really do them any favors, as they finished last in the division. But for his season, Howe would be nominated to the NHL's first NHL All-Star team for the 10th time. The 1968-69 season, well, that would see Howe and Del Vecchio put on a line with Frank Mahovlich to form the 3rd version of the production line, with the intention of scoring more to win more, as Mahovlich was well known as a good goal scorer during his time. And, well, the move paid off, as Howe would once again lead the team in all offensive categories with career bests. Yeah, we're still putting up career bests with assists at 59 and points with 103. The first and only time in Howe's career he would put up over 100 points. And those 103 points, well, they were still good enough for 3rd in league scoring. There were 2 players that had more points than him. One was Hull, one was Esposito. So he was in good company as far as the 100 points went. And while the Red Wings wouldn't finish in last in the East Division this year, they'd still miss the playoffs for a 3rd straight year. But for the season Howe had, he'd be nominated to NHL's first All-Star team for the 11th time. Now, 69-70 would see the Red Wings fare a bit better than the last 3 seasons, already finishing 3rd in the East. Better than 5th, better than 6th. Howe would record his 19th and final regular season hat trick on November 2nd, 1969, against the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, all told, Howe would lead the team in points with 71 in 76 games, while finishing 9th in league scoring. And this would be the last time Howe would finish in the top 10 in league scoring, after finding a spot between number 1 and number 10 for 21 consecutive years. 21 years in the top 10. Wow. And while the Red Wings, well, they did advance to the playoffs, the visit wouldn't last very long, as the Wings would be swept in 4 games by the Chicago Blackhawks, with Howe adding only 2 goals in those 4 games. And this would mark the last time Howe would play in the playoffs as a member of the Detroit Red Wings. But for the regular season he had, Howe would be nominated to the NHL's first NHL All-Star team for the 12th time in his career. Again, when you're good, you know it. The 1970-71 season, however, would be Gordie Howe's final season with the Detroit Red Wings, and despite being limited to 63 games, he still had enough time to add more to his legacy, if you want to call it that, becoming the first player in league history to record 1,000 assists, doing so on October 29th, 1970 in a win over the Boston Bruins. And he would also be the first NHL player in history to record 1,800 points, doing so in a 4-point effort on February 20th, 1971 against the Buffalo Sabres. Now, all told, Howe finished third in team scoring with 52 points, while the Red Wings went back to finishing seventh now, in the East Division, failing to make the playoffs. So, after 25 years of making hockey history and breaking NHL records and coming off of his quote-unquote worst offensive season and dealing with chronic wrist injury, Gordie Howe made the decision to retire from the NHL on September 8, 1971, leaving behind league records that stood for years, well until another one of the GOATs came along. And if you've made it this far, well, that's the story of Mr. Hockey's career with the Detroit Red Wings. So let's talk some numbers. All right, so in a team record 1,687 games played, he scored a team record 786 goals, added 1,023 assists for a team record 1,809 points to go along with his 1,643 penalty minutes. Now, if we're talking playoffs, that's 154 games with 67 goals, 91 assists, and 158 points to go along with a team record 218 penalty minutes. Now, Mr. Hockey is also a 6-time Art Ross Trophy winner, being awarded to the player who leads the league in points in 1951, 1952, 1953, 1954, 1957, and 1963. He's also a 6-time Hart Memorial Trophy winner, going to the league MVP in 1952, 1953, 1957, 1958, 1960, and 1963. And he's also a 4-time Stanley Cup champ, winning it in 1950, 1952, 1954, and 1955. As a member of the Red Wings, he played in 22 NHL All-Star games, which is part of a league record. Now again, part 2 will tie it all up. But if we want to know the years, 1948, 1949, 1950, 1951, 52, 53, 54, 55, 1957, 1958, 59, 1960, 1961, 1962, 1963, 64, 65, 67, 68, 69, 1970, and 1971. Now, he's the first-time NHL All-Star 12 times in his career. That was from 1951, 1952, 1953, 1954, 1957, 1958, 1960, 1963, 1966, 1968, 1969, and 1970. And he's also a 9-time NHL second-team All-Star, doing so in 1949, 1950, 1956, 1959, 1961, 1962, 1964, 1965, and 1967. Now, he also led the league in goal scoring 5 times, doing so in 1951, 1952, 1953, 1957, and 1963. As 1,687 games played for one team are still a league record. One of the few league records he still owns. His 22 consecutive 20-plus goal seasons are still a league record. He's still the first player to record 1,000 points, the first player to record 1,000 assists, the first player to play in 1,500 games, the first player to score 600, 700 goals in an NHL season, or NHL career, sorry. He also led the NHL playoffs in scoring 6 times, which is in itself a playoff record. But at the time of his retirement, Howe held the league records for games played, goals, assists, and points, all of which have since been broken. But his top 5 in the NHL, scoring 21 straight seasons. I don't know if that one will ever get beat. Now, he was named one of the NHL's 100 greatest players during the NHL's centennial season, and was nominated to the NHL's Hockey Hall of Fame. He was nominated to the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1972, having the 3-year mandatory wait period waived to get him in. His number was retired by the Detroit Red Wings on March 2nd, 1972. So if you made it this far, then you definitely want to hear my own opinion of the guy. So let's get to that. Well, where to begin? Well, I mean, I guess he ain't called Mr. Hockey for no reason. I mean, in terms of great, he was exactly that. Just look at his numbers. I mean, he can score, he can make the play, he can make the hit, he can take the hit, he can draw the penalty, he can take the penalty, he can fight if you need it. I mean, he's got a hat trick named after himself. That's where you get a goal, an assist, and you get in a fight. He could do it all, and he was good at it. And while I'm still trying to think of what I can say that hasn't already been said, I know it's already been said that he is ambidextrous, so he could shoot right or left. It didn't matter. And granted, his glory years were well ahead of my time. I mean, I was a wee little Trev when he was wrapping up his career the second time. But, you know, thanks to archival footage, the histories, and the experts, it's hard to dispute that he wasn't. And he played for 25 years in Detroit. I mean, that should tell you enough about his longevity. You know, most players, with a few exceptions, most players, they can't play more than 20 years. I mean, you get guys retiring after 15, 16 years because of injury or whatever the case might be. He managed to play 25 years. And he didn't take a year off. There was none of that. But the consistency that he played with, too, I mean, to finish in the top 10 for 21 straight years out of a 25-year career, like, whoa, that alone says enough. Now, obviously, it's not hard to understand why the 3-year waiting period was waived to get him in the Hockey Hall of Fame. I mean, with stats like his, even at that time, yeah, it's not hard to understand why. But without saying much more, I mean, the guy was the GOAT in every sense of the word before other GOATs came along. I mean, to this day, he's still held up in the highest of regards, which says a lot. But overall, yeah, that's Gordie Howe, essentially, right there. So that's another one of them Trev's hockey shows. I want to thank you for tuning in, especially if you're here. If you're here, I'm sorry. I mean, that was 40-some minutes. I knew this one was going to be long. I didn't know it was going to be 40-some minutes. But if you've made it this far, I'm glad you're here. I really am. I'm glad you stuck with it. I mean, if you're here, if you're going to say, hey, if you're digging what I'm doing, then definitely please give me that thumbs up. This one was fun to make, even though it's long to look at. But if you want to, that little red button that says subscribe all over it, come on, you know you want to hit it. I know you want to hit it. We're this close to 300. We want to get to 500 by the end of the year. And trust me, you'll feel good if you do it. Trust me, it'll make me feel good. The algorithm will probably feel good too, so why deny that, right? If you want to, that link in my description below, that'll take you to my Facebook page. I'd love to build an audience there, so feel free to join that. I mean, it's free. And I'm posting a lot more on that Facebook page too, so that's never a bad thing. So moving forward, as far as retired numbers are concerned, well, as I've said many, many, many times, we're walking giants now. So, I mean, with the one I'm working on now, expect one for goal scorers. Can never go wrong with that. But either way, in the meantime, and between time, be looking for you, Trev. Data.